Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover This Face Off XL, where it's both the start of 2025 and 1991. And in a time before Amiga Power, I had to draft in a few extra magazines. So welcome Amiga Fun and Zero. And joining them are Amiga Format, The One, CU Amiga and Amiga Action. Fight! And up first is The One for Amiga, Atari ST and PC. Yes, this was before it split up and rebranded to become just The One for Amiga. And its cover disc had two demos, one for the Atari ST, which was Midwinter 2, and for the Amiga we got Rick Dangerous 2.5. That was a fancy way of saying this is a demo for Rick Dangerous 2, but it had a completely new level for you to play. And we all know how much I enjoy unique content for demos. This is a pretty tough demo, which is a great indication of the full thing. As anyone who's played Rick Dangerous knows, this game is not a pushover. But for those who haven't played it, this is a platformer in which you just have to make it to the exit, which is made much harder by the traps, baddies, and obstacles that will definitely get in your way. To try and make things easier, you have a punch, a ray gun, and dynamite, that in the sequel you can now slide across the floor. But at the merest hint of touching a spike or a baddie, you will be killed and thrown into the screen. This is a very unforgiving game. And it's also one that has far more complex traps and puzzles than ever before. If you played Rick Dangerous 1 and 2 but never experienced this demo, then you should give it a go. It's not as long as a regular level, but it will take you a little while to work it out. But I don't think it's going to win over anyone who bounced off Rick Dangerous 1, as this is very much a sequel and a demo that builds on the previous game, so if you enjoyed it, then you should enjoy this. And what's lower than 1? It's 0. And like The One, this is also a multi-format magazine, and they included demos and a full game for both the Amiga and Atari. And starting with that full game, we find Chase, a game that had already been out for 2 years by this point. This is a 3D wireframe game where we're flying around in space, but mostly in one direction. And it's played solely via the mouse, with the right mouse button handling speeding up and slowing down, and the left firing the lasers. In this first stage, you have to fly around avoiding the asteroids, while trying to catch up and shoot the blue Disgust Matron ships. They take quite a few shots to take out, or at least it appears to, as annoyingly they don't give you any indication when you manage to hit them. Not until they just suddenly explode. This was initially a budget-priced game that didn't review all that well. And it wasn't a game that I'd heard of before either. The levels do mix things up as you go along, as you have a slalom-style course and flying down tunnels, so this was clearly influenced by the Vector arcade games, and particular Star Wars. And it's not that bad, it's just a little basic. But it does show how the Amiga market had evolved in those years, as quite soon we would see PD games that would rival or better this. But probably what is more interesting is the fact that they had both Amiga and Atari ST stuff on the same disc. And if you're interested in finding out how the magazines managed to do that, well, Rob Smith Dev has done a video on that very subject, and covered it very well. So I will include a link to his video in the description. Zero's demo is for Viz. This is based on the comic, that I think is best described as a kid's idea of what adult humour is. And because of this, the next bit is a little bit not safe for work. I have pixelated it, but if you don't want to see it, then skip to the timestamp on the screen right now. So it's basically a bunch of swearing, sex, and fart jokes. And in this demo we get to play as Johnny Fart Pants. And in this we have to waggle the stick to make him propel himself up as high as possible. This is just one of many events that's in the full game, but for the Amiga demo, this is all we get. But if we were running the Atari ST version, then we would have got a free playing demo showing off the race. So it is a very limited demo. We blast off to CU Amiga next, that had just a single disc which was a full game, Super Huey. Or it will be once we get past this Cracktro style sequence that CU Amiga included. Now this was originally released way back in 1987, so it's a bit of an older game for 1991, and it does look quite old as well. Now just getting this far was a bit of a pain. This being an older title, it was very picky with which kickstart and RAM it would run on. And it might appear that I'm waffling on a little bit, well it's mostly because this is actually far more complex than it might appear. You have to enter commands into the onboard computer with your keyboard before it will do anything. Like you'll have to type in miss to start a mission. You can then type in the name of the mission you want to play. But after a bit you will manage to start the helicopter up, and then wait for it to warm up its engines, which will require you knowing how fast you need to make the engine go. With the barely adequate 2 pages that CU Amiga gave it, this wasn't easy, and at times it just felt like the whole thing crashed as it wouldn't respond to any input. Now much of this was down to the fact that you actually needed to put the mouse in port 2. Not that this was mentioned anywhere in the magazine, I only found a reference to it in an online copy of the manual. And with that, things started to make a little bit more sense, but I have no idea why they did this. Whoever ported this to the Amiga had no idea what they were doing. Now I will admit that I'm not the biggest fan of flight sims, I much prefer space sims, but this one really just annoyed me so much that I didn't really want to play it. Even when I finally managed to get the thing to take off, it was just way too much effort to get going. And I'm sure someone in the comments will let me know if this was the right choice or not, or if I really should have given this a proper go, but the reviews at the time, they were not exactly great, and I can understand why. It's really weird for a game to have this much amount of simulation and faffing around, while also looking as basic and simple as it does. That Cracktro at the start, that might have been the best part of this disc. Amiga Action acts as a bit of a palette cleanser, which across its single disc provided 2 demos, with the first one being Horror Zombies from the Crypt. A game with some lovely presentation, with what looks to be the complete intro from the full game. And then you get to play the 3rd level that, well, it gives you a lot of opportunities to see the nicely done death animation, that's for sure. As vampires that just appear and fly down are a big source of these deaths. But if you manage to avoid them, you can then get a key that allows you to continue deeper into the level of the game. Now from what little I've seen of it, this seems to be a platform adventure style game, where collecting keys and items and opening doors and crates are the main way that you progress. You might even find a weapon, and then you can fight back against the horror zombies. As stated, the presentation is great, but the controls feel a little stiff. And the quick and often deaths aren't exactly fun. I'm not sure if this demo would have sold me on the game or not, but being January, the selection of games they had for the magazines was massively reduced, as everyone had pushed hard to get their biggest titles out for Xmas. Next, we hit an issue that I've been working around and trying to avoid since I started Cover Disc Face Off. But this time, I've failed, as the next demo should have been for James Pond. But as we can see, the copy that I have just doesn't really work. So for now, let's look at what I'd expect the demo would have been like, which I'm basing on the images that they have in the magazine, and what I think is the most common approach, which is showing off the first level, as that was quicker than making up something new or unique. But in using the full game as your basis for the demo does have its own problems, such as here, where they included the final game's copy protection system, and the solitary copy of this disc that I found just doesn't seem to work correctly, or it's not been ripped quite right. And unfortunately, I could not find a copy of this in my own personal collection. Which is a bit of a shame, as James Pond is actually quite an interesting game. In some ways, more interesting than its more famous sequel, because you actually swim around underwater, like a fish. And if you go up on land, well, you have far more limited control over your abilities, and your health slowly ticks down. Now, each level also has its own objectives, which is mostly find something and then use it on something else a set number of times, like finding the keys and then letting the lobsters out before the fishermen can get them, while along the way other baddies will try and stop you so you can use your bubbles to trap them and then remove them. There is also all sorts of hidden places to find. It's annoying that I couldn't get this demo to work, as it would have been a real contender for the top 3. But seeing that I can't actually play it and know what they included, we're gonna have to leave it off. Amiga Fun is up next, which provided a single disc with the full game, which was for the final day. Now, calling this a magazine with a game might be a little too generous to it, as really it was a game with a 30 to 100 page pamphlet, which was just as much manual as it was reviews and adverts. Now, this didn't do all that well, and later on it was replaced by Amiga Mania that we got to see last month. This is all to say, I'm really unsure about this game, because what the magazine did was find unreleased games and then publish them. Now, in this one we are exploring the space station, I guess, and we're trying to find keys and other objects, all while travelling through doors and shooting a weird array of baddies, all while a counter slowly ticks down, much like Impossible Mission. Now, when you get shot, you don't lose life, you lose time. And graphically, I think this looks fine, and it has some great use of colours. And that HUD looks really cool. But the main character moves around so slowly, and interacting with the doors and computers is a little bit clunky. As what you need to do is turn your character around, and when you do that, you can stay in the middle state. And that is how you use objects in the world. Thankfully, I managed to find a single page of the manual, which explains things a little bit better, as it seems that we have to interact with every terminal that you'll find, and these aren't the most obvious of things either. Now, the majority of the time when you do that, it will say no code, but others will ask you to solve a math puzzle to get a code fragment. And you need to find all the code fragments scattered across this huge level to be able to complete it, all while having to deal with all those baddies and your limited ammo. Now, this is one of those games that could go one of two ways after we put a lot of time into it. It could open up to be quite an interesting title, and one that I've not really checked out before. Or it could be really boring and just recycle what we've already seen. And the final magazine for the month is Amiga Format, that was bursting to pop with its 2 discs, as it had 2 demos, a PD game, some programs and tools, as well as a full title. So let's start off with that PD game, which the menu called BIP, and the title screen called Biplane Duel. It's a game we've seen many times before, but this might be the earliest version of it, as it's 2-player only. Which comes as a bit of a relief to me, as when we've seen this previously, the AI would absolutely hammer me. It gave no second or even first chances, as you get to fly around in your little biplane and then try to shoot the other player. That's if you do manage to get off the ground, that is. This is a little bit basic, but it is fun if you get to play with a mate. Or check out the later versions that had that AI in it. And before we take a look at the software that came on this disc, a flashing screen warning for anyone who has issues with that. If you need to skip, there's a timestamp on the screen right now. Now, if you are hosting an Amiga themed New Year party, then you might want to check out Psychedelic, which is a combination music and light show generator, so your guests could watch something cool. The included track is decent enough, but you can also use your own music. This was also a time when Format included a picture of the month. And where else can you get to see Daffy Duck meeting up with Count Duckula? And it seems that Amiga Format was way ahead of the game in putting AI where it really wasn't asked for, as they included 2 AI systems. The first is Eliza, which was one of the very early AI chat systems that could actually fool a few people. But it does feel a little mechanical in its responses, but then you could also say the same about what we see now. Just with it making up less stuff when it doesn't know the answer, or creating pictures that have 15 fingers and 3 arms that seem to merge into a table. The second one is Nile, the Non-Intelligent Amos Language Learner, which is a system that will take in your sentences that you write and then will build up a database of relationships, such as working out which words start sentences, which ones end them, and then the order that words tend to show up in. And when this database is big enough, you can get it to generate new sentences based on all the rules that it's learned. Now, I've not messed around with Nile all that much, but we used to have something similar in the IRC days, which we trained up on all the things that people would say in our IRC channels. And then we could get it to spit out lines that sounded very similar to what we would have said, even if for the most part it was nonsense.
If we cannot make much in the second line.
But then this is what AI is all about really, building up language models based on what it thinks goes well together.
This the DB at the Amiga to build up with.
Just this one doesn't require 1,000 GPUs and half a city's power to run it.
How very large vocabulary.
The first of its demos is Lemmings, a 3-level demo for that amazing game, selected at what feels like random across the entire title. So get ready for some difficult puzzling, as we don't get any of those nice simple ones to ease us into the game. Instead, if this is your first time playing it, you're gonna have to learn on the job. And I'm sure everyone at this point knows Lemmings, the game in which you have to guide your band of death-prone critters from the starting point to the exit, and this would typically require using one of them to try and form the path required, but other levels, well, it might need a few of them to get going. And to do this, you'll use your limited number of tools that you have in that tray at the bottom, and the amount of each of them is dictated by the level. Levels that are full of traps, pits, and various ways for our little animals to die. Or you can just nuke them for fun. This is a great game and a fun, if slightly limited demo. And our last demo for the episode is Total Recall, a movie that I would not have been able to see, being just 9 at the time, but the game, yeah, let's play it, why not? And what did they turn this film into? A platformer, obviously. And one that seems to have infinitely spawning baddies as well. It also has what seems to be a single life. Now, looking at the magazine, it seems the goal is to collect 4 objects hidden in the level, with the arrow at the top of the screen giving you an indication of where to go. But this isn't particularly easy. Not when you add in the fact that you only have 3 minutes to find them. Now, I'm not sure if that's a demo limit or in the full game, as I've not really played it. But also add into the fact that those baddies just keep coming, and this is not an easy demo. The level is a bit of a maze, with lifts that can get you around, but you're going to have to learn all of this to get anywhere in it. And I think the music is going harder than anything else in this game. The combat, well, it feels basic, but you can find a gun, even if it does have limited ammo. If, and I feel this is a big if, you manage to finish the demo, then your reward is it crashing, as it will try to load the next part of the game and fails. Or at least, so the magazine tells me. Overall, I think this looks fine enough, but this demo really isn't selling me on the full game. And let's finish on its full game, Interphase. That starts off with a song that I swear is trying to become She Drives Me Crazy. And then fires you down a tunnel. All of which can be very confusing at first. And then it continues to be confusing when you get to the end of it. It should come as no surprise that Amiga Format picked yet another complex game as their full free title. Which I guess is in keeping with the more serious tone of the magazine, as well as trying to find a game that the publisher is more than happy enough to give away. As it's these types of games that tended to not sell all that well. Even if it did look very fancy with its full 3D world and its models all moving around. And after looking up the magazine and the 4 pages that they dedicated to it, including a quick start and an even quicker start guide, it turns out that this is an interesting and quite in-depth game. Now we play as Chad, who is a hacker. And we have to deal with the security system of a building in this cyberspace style environment, all to help out Caf-E work her way to the top of the building to steal some music. Or at least that's what I think is going on. Now we'll have to move from this 3D world to the 2D map to work out where Caf-E is and what is currently blocking her. But she will also drop messages to give you a hint as well. And in this instance, it's this door that is locked. Now we can set a nav point, and then fly up through the floors, as we can go up and down this building at will, and then shoot at the door to let her move on. And this gives an idea of what you'll have to do in this game, as there's all sorts of traps and tricks to deal with. And there's enemies flying around in cyberspace that are also trying to attack you, and everything in this game seems to happen in some form of real time, so trying to do things quickly is important. Now this was the best reviewed full game of the episode, and I can see why. I can also understand why this got quite the range of scores, as this requires some serious time and thought to really get into. And I'm sure some of those reviewers just bounced off it, as I almost did as well. To be honest, I'm wondering if this might have been a little ahead of its time, as I could see this working much better today with having multiple views going on at the same time, so you could see Caf-E moving around while you're in the computer world. And there we have it, January of 1991. And with that, let's see what I thought was the most interesting titles. And in last place, I'm gonna say The Final Day. I'm not sure if I would have quickly gotten bored with it, but it did look to be a large game with a lot to do. So I can see me putting a whole bunch of time into it to work out what's going on. Now in second place, I've put Interphase, which is almost identical in some ways to the previous game, as again, I'm not sure how quickly I would have got bored with it. But I do think it's interesting enough and has some really cool ideas that I would have kept coming back to try and work it out. And in first place, Lemmings. It had to be this. This was the game that we got with our A500 Plus that I put so much time into. So I never really played the demo, but if we got our Amiga earlier and I had played this, then I know I would have wanted the full thing. So what do you think of my rankings? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments, and I hope you all have a great 2025. And until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was some interesting full titles from the cover discs, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. I'm continuing to have so much fun with these cover disc episodes as I keep finding new games to check out. And if this is the first time you've checked out the channel, then consider subscribing, as I put out new videos all the time and have quite the back catalogue, of which you should see there's links on the screen that you can try before you buy.